Hey everyone, I hope you guys are enjoying your snow day here. Just wanted to go over a couple of questions that people had here from their note cards and from Twitter about the quiz next class. A couple of things that were popping up that I want to make sure people are clear on. So as we're reviewing, let's look first at cross elasticity of demand. That was one that came up a couple of times in the questions, and I just want to make sure you guys are clear here on what cross elasticity is. So cross elasticity, right, allows us to measure the responsiveness of a particular good to a change in price of another good. So the cross tells us that we're reviewing two different goods here. And so the way we measure this is percentage change in the quantity demanded of one good, good X, over the percentage change in the price of another good, price of Y here. And so the coefficient that we get for this, right, if we get a positive coefficient, that tells us these two goods are substitutes. All right, two goods that can be replaced with one another. So if the price of chicken goes up, the quantity demanded of pork goes up, right? Think about this. If the price of chicken goes up at the store, you're not going to buy as much chicken, you're going to buy the cheaper substitute, in this case, pork. All right, if we get a negative coefficient, that tells us these two goods are complements. All right, and think about this. If the price of beef goes up, right, we're not going to have as many barbecues. We don't need to buy as much charcoal. So the quantity demanded of charcoal will go down. All right, so positive coefficient tells us that it is a substitute good. Negative tells us that it's a complement. Again, this just allows us to say what happens if we change the price of one good. How does that affect our quantity demanded of another? All elasticities are doing are measuring responsiveness. So the other elasticity that people had questions about was, in this case now let's look at income elasticity. So income elasticity. All right, and when we measure income elasticity, same thing, we're just measuring a response. Right, in this case, the response is what happens, our percentage change in quantity demanded. What happens if we change our income? So our change in income. Remember, Y is just shorthand here for income. All right, now we'll get a positive or a negative coefficient here. Positive coefficient tells us that this particular good, whatever we're measuring, is a normal good. All right, if we have more money, we'll buy more of these goods. So think of new cars, luxury items, right? Those are all normal goods, things that we buy more of as our income increases. All right, if it is a negative, then we know that this is an inferior good. Right, things that we buy less of as our income goes up. So we're making more money, we're going to buy less of these goods. So for example, Malto meal versus name brand cereal, used cars versus new cars. These tells us this negative coefficient tells us these are inferior goods. All right, so those were just a couple of the questions people had about elasticities. The next thing I want to look at, people had questions about, was the effects of price ceilings and price floors. So let's look at those real quick, switching gears here. So here we have, right, our supply and demand market. Okay. Now, normally, producers and consumers come together at a nice equilibrium point. Right? They come together and tell us at a nice point where we agree on a price and a quantity and everything works out well. Where we run into trouble is when we're in a disequilibrium. So let's look at a first example of a price ceiling. All right, now, in a price ceiling, again, a effective or binding price ceiling will actually be below equilibrium. Price ceilings are a legal maximum price that the government sets. And let's say here at our price ceiling, remember, it has to be below equilibrium for it to have an effect. And the biggest thing that you need to get from a price ceiling, right, is what the outcome is going to be. Notice that we have a greater quantity demanded. This makes sense. As a consumer, you will buy more of a good or demand more of a good as the price goes down, as the price decreases. Right? The law of demand tells us that you may not have bought something at $7, but you're willing to at $5. But it works in reverse for supply. Suppliers are not willing to supply more. In fact, they're going to supply less. They're going to make less profit. There's less incentive for them to stay in this market. They will supply less of a particular good. So this disequilibrium that we have causes this gap. an effective price ceiling will cause, right, a shortage. We'll have more demand than we do supply. The example that we used in class was talking about rent control for apartments in New York. That's probably the biggest example to know. All right, so we have, again, this gap, this shortage here that is caused by an effective price ceiling. The more common one that we'll look at, though, is a price floor. And again, I think where people are getting confused is the fact that a price floor, a legal minimum price set by the government, is actually going to be above equilibrium where it's in a binding position. So what we see with a price floor is the exact opposite. There's a greater supply than there is demand in this case. So the example that we used in class, right, was the minimum wage, right? What happens if we raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $10, right? We have more people willing to supply their labor than we do demanding their labor, than we have people willing to hire. So what we get here is a surplus. So this gap, not a shortage, but a surplus. And where we see that coming to a problem with minimum wages, that is actually going to cause some unemployment. If we raise the minimum wage from $7 to $10.10 an hour, we're going to see a surplus of workers, people who are now willing to work to supply their labor at $10.10 than people are demanding it. Now, we know that's going to cause a surplus and some unemployment. We talked about some of the other reasons we might want to raise the minimum wage anyway, just knowing that's going to be the problem, right? Living wage, lifting people out of poverty, allowing them to buy more goods and things like that. So this was just kind of a quick review. Hopefully it clears up a couple of the questions that you guys had for the quiz. Right, if you have anything else, you can hit me on Twitter at APEconGannon. Send me an email either way, and hopefully we will be back in school after all these snow days and be able to take this quiz.